Hello Mayhem Makers, I'm Mindy with Quilting Mayhem. Welcome back to another Summer Sampler 2022 tutorial. This week is block 4, Road to Oklahoma. I love this one. I'm sure I say this a lot. It's another one of those blocks. It looks complicated, but it's really not. So we're working with squares and half square triangles. Super simple. We've done the half square triangles. We're just going to do them again. But this time, instead of putting the block together in rows, I'm actually going to show you how to put them in quadrants of 4-patch style. So if you're new, 4 patches are literally 4 squares. Okay, so we're going to do 2 different ones. You're going to do 2 of each to make the one block. All right, so we'll get started with the half square triangle. Easy peasy. So take your 2 squares. Thankfully, if you're doing from the kit, they're just konas. There's no right or wrong. Otherwise, these would be what we call right sides together. So the print would be on the inside. And then you start with drawing a diagonal line. And then you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam down both sides. So this time around, I actually kind of cheated. I got some stuff done ahead of time. I love this. So you're going to stitch just 1/4 inch either side of the line and then cut it apart with your handy dandy cutter and press those blocks. All right, and for most of these I do press those seams open, and then we'll go here, and I use just a little bit of starch on that seam, so it's a 1/3 water, a 1/3 flatter, a 1/3 best press. I think in one of my other videos I forgot to tell you what all 3 components were, and I'm just locking in. It's just kind of tightening those threads in there, locking that seam in nice and tight, and then I'm going to press it open. And I do like using steam. Not everybody does. It's one of those personal preference. So don't worry, if you do this type of stuff differently, it's okay. There's no right or wrong. There's no quilt police. I don't have time for going around telling people they're pressing incorrectly. Just certain things to know. Just make sure you pick, if you either press one way or you press, so it's nice and open and flat. Just pick a method. I don't generally mix them very often, where sometimes it's to one side and sometimes it's open. I'm just trying to reduce bulk as these seams start to go together. And the only other key when pressing is just making sure you're not like aggressive pressing. Unless you're really trying to stretch that block to fit the dimension you need, aggressive pressing will actually warp your block. And we'll show you how to trim this guy. So I'm going to change these. I love these rulers. 4.5 by 8.5, 4.5 square. They live here. They are the Creative Grids. So what's nice is they have both 1 inch and 1/2 inch markings all the way around. A 1/4 inch marking on one side, 1/2 inch on the other. The diagonal line. It's just, these are my favorite, and they have little grippies, so they don't slip near as much as my older rulers used to. So when trimming half square triangles, the biggest key, put that diagonal line down the seam, and I'm just going to keep shifting this ruler until I make sure that 3.5 inches all the way around fits inside the lines. And then I'm going to trim off any excess, I need to trim this down to 3.5. I've purposely had you guys make these blocks bigger so that you could trim in case your seams are a little off. I always like to give extra room and trim down versus trying to be super exact and just hope that that seam is really good every time. I figure this is really, while a little more effort, generally is a little less stressful because you're just trimming just little bits. But then you have a nice perfectly sized block. You don't have to worry about it not being exactly 3.5. Same thing, we're just going to make sure 3.5 all the way around, trim 2 sides. And now that these sides I know are nice and clean and straight, I can line it up right on the 3.5 mark on my ruler over here and trim up. And notice I just have my fingers kind of spread out evenly, weight distribution downwards to keep that ruler from pivoting. Just key thing. So we'll clean off all the mess. And then you'll start laying it out. So make sure you're referring, to the diagram and the pattern that you pick up, so that when you start laying out your pieces, everything is where it belongs. So it's making kind of this arrow look, right? So then what you're going to do is put them right sides together and sew them. Make sure these edges are nice and lined up. Make sure your corners start and end right at the beginning and end. All right, you don't want it starting that little bit off, because then you're going to have a seam that's just wonky, and that wonkiness is going to follow through with you. All right, so then you take it to the machine and sew just a 1/4 inch seam. Basic quilting seam is 1/4 inch or scant 1/4 inch, so just a skosh thinner. It's not an exact measurement, sorry. And then just making sure everything's lined up nice and pretty. And then you're going to press them. Okay. So I actually have it ready to go, because I may have had issues recording on a different day, and so I got partway through and everything went upside down. So I've got extra pieces now. All right, so then right sides together. Yeah, I'm not perfect, guys. Trust me. If you take any of my classes, I tell you, I've already made all the mistakes, and that way I can teach you how to avoid them. All right, so match up these seams and put a pin. Especially if you're new, I'm always telling you, use pins, and then pin the beginning so that these corners are matching. All right, and pin the end so the corners are matching, because that's where you really start to lose control. And you don't want that, especially if you're new. I don't like you guys getting frustrated in the very beginning and giving up, because quilting is, I love it. I've been doing it for decades, because I love it so much. So we're trying to make sure it's as stress-free as possible for you guys. Okay? So make sure you take your pins out before you sew over them, because if you run it over and pieces get down in that bobbin area, bad things can happen. So I'm gonna make sure it looks correct. Yay, yep, it looks like an arrow. Okay, so then press that. And I do have a wool mat under here that I just have put some muslin over the top. It's really nice because it holds the heat and keeps working on setting that seam as it cools down if you let it sit on there, as opposed to using just a cold surface. So it kind of just keeps on keeping that steam and heat going in there. And I let my block set, and so as it cools, it just keeps kind of working its magic in that seam. And then we're going to move on to the nice simple little 4-patch. All you're doing for this one is you're putting right sides together, your 2 squares or 2 opposing squares. So you'll have 2 sets that pretty much look the same, and you're going to sew 1/4 inch, same as the others, right? Matching those corners. Trying to make sure you keep, nice straight 1/4 inch seams. And if you're new, this just takes practice. If you've been quilting a while, you're probably tired of me. You're like, yeah, we know. Trust me, we know. All right, so then press them. Put them this way so the fabrics are opposing each other. Same thing, we're going to put it together. Match these centers. Match the beginning and match the end. Same thing. So nice, easy. And this is one of the what I call the most basic quilting block that we a lot of times will teach beginning quilting is just 4 patches, because you're just learning how to do those 1/4 inch seams nice and straight, because believe it or not, some people struggle just getting straight. Especially sometimes if you're working with older machines and those kinds of things. Feed dogs have come a long way. Machines have come along with dual feed, where it adds extra grip on the top. So this one actually has a dual feed. I don't know if you can see it, but back here, so this guy comes down and it has essentially its own little feed dog on the top. So it comes down, meets with those feed dogs on the bottom, and it's actually pulling it together. So I love that part. It gives a little extra precision. So if your machine has that, you're ahead of the game. I think it's such an improvement from what we've had in the past. All right, so same thing. Make sure you have them correct. Press it. Move that guy. Give it a nice press. And then you're ready to put the final parts of the block together. So we'll come back over here and kind of show you what we're doing. So what's going to happen is you'll start laying it out to make sure it looks like the picture, which this does not. So remembering that these 2 squares are going to come and meet up with this arrow, because this is going to make kind of a chain through the middle, and then these arrows are going to face each other. So then down here you'll have this guy, and then over here is going to make that chain. All right. Sorry, I don't have a huge amount of space here. All right. So then what will happen is we're going to put these right sides together and pin. And if you're an experienced quilter, you know you don't have to pin at the beginning and the end. If you know you can keep them straight, you don't have to worry about it. But definitely you want to pin where these 2 seams meet. So we're just going to lay them right sides together, match up those joins, because that's where you want to make sure everything comes together nice. We're going to just sew them and press them, and then we'll only be 1 more seam away, have a block. Hopefully you've been following along and actually have gotten through blocks maybe 1, 2, and 3. Or if you've just tripped over this, so this is the first time you've watched any of my videos, welcome to my home studio. Please ignore the mess. I'm a quilter and a quilt shop owner. I got a lot of stuff going on, unfortunately, kind of in my studio. So I try to pretend all that stuff doesn't exist in the background. Stopping, pulling pins. It's very key. Cut that. Press. So, and I do trim all these like beginning threads. Make sure, keep that quilt clean. It will ensure that you don't accidentally get it caught on anything down the road. When you're quilting and starting to put more blocks together, you just don't want that mess starting to kind of bulk up under your quilt, because it will potentially all show, will start to show lumps and bumps as you quilt your quilt. So I just try to encourage you to have nice clean quilts. All right, so there's top half. And then bottom half. All right, so realize, so this is the bottom half, top half. So Also realize though, hey, look, they're actually the same. We're just gonna flip it around, right? And then same thing, flip it down, right sides together, and pin each of these seams. So there's going to be 3 different places where the seams match up. Just pin each one of those. And then if you're still not comfortable with making sure the beginning and end is straight and matching, then pin those. Once you get more experienced, it's usually not as hard. You just, you know, they should just line up. Everything should just be nice lining up. They shouldn't be off, because all your seams, all your trimming, everything should be just coming together magically. All right, so you just take it to your machine, do that last quarter inch seam. I just make sure as I go those seams stay nice and even. Taking those pins out, making sure everything's nice and straight. Taking that last pin out, and then making sure my bottom 2 over here, I just make sure these are nice and even. Sometimes I'll hold a finger on it as I go, just to make sure it doesn't lose control. Sometimes they do. You think everything's going good, and you get to that very end, and all of a sudden it goes, eh. And you just go, why? Why do you do that? All right, so we're going to press our final seam here. Lost control. I try to make sure all my seams are flat when I do this. This is when I do that last final seam check. And a lot of times, once my full block is done, I just shoot it with a little starch and give it one final press. I just like having nice crisp blocks as I put them together in the quilt. So giving it that starch just kind of tightens everything up. And don't worry, once your quilt's quilted and you start washing it, all of that starchiness, it comes back out. It's just kind of a temporary hold. And then, look, Road to Oklahoma. I like it. You could do an entire quilt with this block. And actually, any of the blocks you do with a summer sampler, if you really like that block, you could do a full quilt. What's nice with this one is if you did a full quilt, you would get a nice chain effect that you could get through the entire quilt. So it could be a whole lot of fun with just this one block. All right, guys. I hope you're enjoying the sew along. We'll see you again next week with block 5. Happy stitching.